Jesus' resurrection. You're probably going to hear a story you've never heard before. You're going to hear information you may have never heard before. So you can check me out, but while we're done, so Jesus once said, everyone on the side of the truth listens to me. At the beginning of John's Gospel, 2:13, it was written, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at the tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market. So if you understand how the temple is laid out and where people are supposed to be and not supposed to be and where the animals are, they were allowed to sell animals, but it was to be outside of the temple, outside the walls and in the market. So these people were in here just destroying the temple with animals and filth and all the poop and everything that they were doing inside the temple, where this wasn't the Holy of Holies, but still it was an area that was not supposed to be treated like a market, like a fair market. So they knew that they shouldn't be doing this, but they had to. They had no other choice. They were afraid of these people. They were afraid of the Pharisees. They were afraid of the high priests and the other priests and the associates and these temple guards. What could they do? So as we go on, this is a few backstories that'll come up in the Sanhedrin when Jesus was taken and arrested. So John 2:19, Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and I will rise again in 3 days. They were all Pharisees standing there when he said this. It's the only people that was standing there, except for the apostles. So now destroy this temple. Obviously, Jesus was talking about himself, and the Pharisees had said that he was talking about the building as they stood there next to it. So moving on to Luke 22:25. Luke 20:25. Show me a denarius whose image and inscriptions are on it. Caesar's, they replied. He said to them, give it back to Caesar, and what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. They were unable to trap him in what he had said there in public, and astonished by his answer, they became silent. Now you can read there in the bottom, it's only by Beelzebul, the prince of demons, that this fellow drives out demons. Now Jesus replied, demons do not drive out demons. So this statement is inaccurate. But also this tells you how bad the Pharisees, they would lie, they would say anything to persuade people's minds. All through the New Testament, in the Gospels, and you can read here in Matthew, where news about him spread all over Syria. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, which is the 10 cities, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. As another example, now when Jesus saw the crowds, this is the introduction of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. And again in Matthew 8, there's large crowds that followed him when he healed the man with leprosy. And it wasn't just Jewish. It wasn't just the Jewish people who were following Jesus. Capernaum, a centurion, came to him asking for help. He said, my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly. And Jesus healed them. A centurion was an officer in the army of ancient Rome. And a centurion was an officer in the army of an ancient Rome. So these centurions, they would become over 100 men, but sometimes it would take 15, 20 years. So these weren't just anyone. These were like, in today's times, they would be like high-ranking police officers or someone in an army, if you will, who had over 100 men. These are some men of Rome, and so they believed in him. Here, Matthew 8:18 and 19, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross the other side of the lake. Again, an example of a large crowd. Now here in Matthew 8:30-34, the whole town went out to meet Jesus. This was the incident where he had take demon-possessed people and threw the demons into the pigs, and they drowned themselves. This whole town went out and knew it and saw it. So again, not just your average people. Here a synagogue leader, a rabbi, came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died." So Jesus even showed up to the synagogue leader's house. And there was a noisy crowd. There was people around playing music and pipes. And the crowd was put outside. And the girl came to life. News of this spread all that region. And again, 2 blind men, their sight was restored. And they went out and spread the news about him all over that region. Again in Matthew 9, a man who was demon-possessed and could not talk was healed. And the crowd was amazed and said, "Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel." Now again, the Pharisees are claiming prince of demons. And again, the Pharisees is trying to persuade the people and tell lies. It is by the prince of demons that he drives out demons. And again, Jesus said demons do not drive out demons. Typically, they gather together and huddle up. So again, here in Matthew, all the towns and villages teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. Jesus saw these crowds and had compassion on these people because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. He went through towns and villages and taught. The greatest story never told, the plot to kill Jesus. And this is the conclusion I read in our Bible. Jesus, in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. He had been dead 4 days. Many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. "What are we accomplishing here?" they asked. "Here is this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away our temple and our nation." So we're already proving that these people are desperate. They would rather keep their status in the world, in the Roman Empire, as to know that there was a man here who could heal and had the power to guide and was the one they were been waiting for. But they'd rather not do that. These are the same men that we'll later find out have been the ones who had killed the prophets throughout the Old Testament. John 12:9. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. Silencing a witness, high priests and Pharisees silenced the prophets. They did the same. Every prophet died to these same people, as the prophets told them, "Stop being a burden." So here in Mark 11, when they brought the colt or donkey to Jesus and threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches they had cut in the fields. Those who went ahead and those who followed shouted, "Hosanna! Please, Lord, please save us. Please, Lord, please give us success." Psalm 118:25 is what basically Hosanna means. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming of kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest heaven. People at this point were proclaiming Jesus to be king. Please, you are the one who come and saved us. You are the one we've been waiting for. Your average Jew who had been listening to Jesus and seen everything he done throughout all the regions, through all the nations, through all out Israel, they were following him. Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple courts. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. This is what they did every night during the week of the Passover. They went out to the hills and the garden to get away from everyone to pray and for their own safety. On the next day, on reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. As he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers?" At this point, the story goes that since Jesus went into the temple and kicked over all the tables and turned everything over, and mind you, I'd like to point out at this point, the image of Jesus that we have of him is completely inaccurate, and there are biblical texts to back up what I'm stating. But understand at this point, when you have temple guards who's watching over this place, they would have attacked, they would have came out any other time, any other pirate, any rebel, bandit, but they didn't. This wasn't a small, tiny Jew. He'd been a carpenter since he was 12 to 29 years old. Manual labor, tying donkeys, having donkeys pull logs, cut logs, saw logs, everything manually. Lift logs. While he's building tables and windows and whatever else he might be doing during that time. All men had a trait. All the apostles had a trait. It's a tent maker, shepherd, something. They were doing something. Most were doing something, some kind of manual labor. So while Jesus was driving all these people out, because they were trampling all in the temple court, they shouldn't have been in there. These areas, they weren't in the Holy of Holies, but they were in an area that they were not supposed to be. There were outside places for trading, for the market, but they had moved it inside, so the Pharisees and the high priest and the money changers can control the market. See, they were in there. The temple money from Caesar was not allowed to be put in as an offering. The high priest set this up so the money lenders would take a percentage, and then the percentage of that would go back to the high priest. So they were making money hand over fist. And the common and the average Jews knew this. And the Pharisees were such a burden on the people about rules and laws, and they themselves didn't listen to them. They didn't live by the same laws and standards that they were pushing on everyone else. Does this sound familiar? So Jesus is giving us examples to stand up to who are believers, and that are those opposing God's word. Meaning, you could tell that these people were high priests. They were supposed to be there for the people, teaching and guiding and being examples. The Old Testament preaches just that. So Jesus is telling us we should sacrifice to man, give to man, share with man. But those who are in the faith should be dealt with when they do as these politicians are doing. With our politicians in our republic are our representatives, not our rulers like the Pharisees. So who are the high priests? Then they were supposed to be the Holy of Holies, teaching the people the law, teaching the people how to behave by examples, not to be overbearing. And main one, thou shalt not kill, and thou shalt not have gods. Thou shalt not have another king other than God. Who are these now? This is organized religion. Yes, it's Catholicism, state religion. Any religion that has its own rule with its own creeds makes people eat this, don't eat that. It's a burden on the people. And Jesus Christ came to do away with all of that. And Jesus is your only high priest. Who are the Pharisees? Then rulers of the law. They enforced the law. They made sure. They walked around. They watched everyone. You'd get beaten. You'd get hit. You'd get licks with whips. Who are they now? They're our politicians, our judges, our police. And all are crooked. One pays off the other. One pushes the tactics of one. One enforces it to make sure that one takes care of the other. And round around they go. And in the middle, here we are as your average Americans, living under people who don't follow the same rules. Who are the Sadducees? Then they were without God and did not believe in any resurrection. And now, evolution scientists, atheists, not so much against God, but again, just without. Liberals, most liberals are without God, and etc. Anyone basically who believing that there is no God. That are the Sadducees. And an old preacher's joke is, that's why they're sad, you see, and really angry. And who are the money changers? Then the temple money changers. See, again, like I said earlier, so the 10% that the Jews were to pay could not be used Roman money. So the high priest had it set up that you had to pay the money changers, and they charged a high percentage.
Also paid the money changers. So these people knew that they were being taken advantage of a burden, but again, they had the Pharisees beating them down, backing up what they were saying. It was a circle to where you had power to power to power.
One backed up the other. Does this sound familiar? Today, it's like the mafia, if you will. It's like any gang member. Anyone you pay money to, and if you don't pay, it's going to be danger. Title loans, they'll take your car. High interest loans, they'll take your car, your house, everything. It's not like a bank. Jesus said to use a bank in one of his parables. He said you should have at least put the money in the bank. It would have drawn interest. That's an organized, regulated industry. We're talking about immoral people here. And the main point of this story is release the scapegoat. The average Jew knew these men were behaving immorally. They were harassed and helpless. They did not abandon Jesus as a massive exodus. With the teaching of all the Jews loved him. And then they all fell away is tying the scapegoat around every Jew. And this is just simply not the case. As we go through the story, you'll understand that they were not there during the time of any of this. And by the time they found out what was going on, judgment was made. And you don't change judgment back in these days. You'll become part of the judged. And you'll hang up on a tree as well. See, basically, you see, it was the chief priest and the teachers of the law who heard what he had done and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. And like every day when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. And at this time the chief priest and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said. There might be a riot among the people. You see, he didn't have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of followers. He had thousands and thousands of followers. I don't know about hundreds of thousands, but in this time, during the special Passover, because it was midweek, an important note, all the Jews from all the lands had come to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was full. All the people were out, tenting out in the surrounding cities and towns and area. All came there to see Jesus,
to see what he was going to say, to see what he was going to do, to see who he was going to heal. These high priests and Pharisees figured out it's too late. It's now or never. And we'll find out what occurrence happened to speed things up. And there was two. So now we're on the first day of the festival, the Passover. And Jesus is preparing his apostles to have the Passover feast. So Jesus is preparing his apostles to have the Passover feast. And the story takes over from there. On the first day of the Festival of Unleavened Bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to make you preparation for you to eat the Passover?" He replied, "Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, 'The teacher says, my appointed time is near. I am going to celebrate the Passover with my disciple at your house.'" So the disciples did as Jesus directed them and prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12. So Jesus is reclining at the table with the 12. Now I know we have the vision of the Passover meal where there's a table and they're all lined up eating. Well, that's just not the case. That's not how they ate back then. They ate meals just so high off the floor. They laid down back to back, and their feet was like laying out to one another. That's why Jesus was washing their feet, so they wouldn't be nasty and filthy laying next to one another. So the meal would be laid out, and the servants would come in the middle and pass the food out as they're laying there. And that's why John could lay back on his chest as they prayed and talked to God and ate. This is how the Passover was eaten then. So some of the stuff we need to know about our Bible, we need to reprogram our thoughts. Again, what Jesus looks like. He wasn't a small, weak, tiny individual, scrawny little Jew. He wasn't a tiny little Jew. He was a man. He was a strong man. And we have biblical proof of how high and how he wore his hair and his characteristics. So let's change our attitude about what we look like, what he looks like. I know most think it doesn't matter, but when you're trying to explain to people about Jesus and his demeanor and his character, you have to know certain things about him, and the gospel and the scriptures describe him. And while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." They were very sad and began to say to him, one after the other, "Surely you do not mean, Lord?" All were tempted by the devil, obviously by their comments. "Surely you don't mean me, Lord?" And just to add, Jesus prayed for John because the devil wanted him. Jesus had told John, "I have prayed that you do not fall into temptation." So obviously the devil was tempting them. As Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi?" Jesus answered, "You have said so." And here it says, while they were eating, Jesus took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he had broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." As we're saying here, while they were eating, the original meal included a meal. You actually broke bread with someone. You shared a glass of wine with someone, a drink, a beverage, and you had a full meal. This again, we need to reprogram our minds about what our ecclesia is. We need to reprogram our mind about our ecclesia, our gathering, our congregation. It's about pulling people in and having meals with them, not this little crumb and a little bit of wine juice or grapefruit juice. You don't have to have alcohol, but the point being is it goes with a meal. See, later we find by the apostles that several of the churches were being accused of eating and drinking more than they were giving away. So everyone was drunk and happy, except the people who they were trying to feed and need. And now we've got it down to a little cup and a little
piece of bread, which also resembles Catholicism with the wafer and the holy drink. So we took a little bit from that, they took a little bit, and some from that Catholicism came out of with their wafer and drink. But our meal, breaking the bread and wine, should come with a meal. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I'll tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now or until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." This is telling us we'll have a new body. We'll have a full body, a full resurrection of a new body. You cannot drink of wine without a body to hold it inside after drinking it, a body to hold the container holding the wine, a body to make the wine. So we'll have a resurrected body. There's another note to these two quotes. Take and eat, this is my body, and this is my blood of the covenant. Later, there'll be a Roman emperor
who will use these words and twist them and turn another group into the scapegoat.
Just as the Jews have been scapegoats since this story. Now when they sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." "Truly, I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." Peter did mean he would die with Jesus. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with the disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Peter did mean he would die with Jesus. We'll later find out about Peter and his action. But Peter meant what he said when he said, "Even if I have to die with you." Again, as the story goes on, we'll learn about Peter and why he disowned him 3 times. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some of the officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. This is telling us that it's in the middle of the night. It's at least in the dark of the night. And later we'll find out about the Jews had a different 24-hour cycle, start and end time, than the Romans. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said. And Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Again, he asked them, "Who is it that you want?" This is an important part. "I am he" is in your Old Testament, stating that "I am he" is God. So when they drew back, it wasn't so much that they were scared, which they could have been, but also they were fear of God's wrath on someone who claimed to be God. So that's why they fell away. And also noted Jesus of Nazareth. Note the number of times that he was called a Nazareth and a Nazarene. And note the number of times that he's called a Nazarene and being from Nazareth. It's an important part of knowing who Jesus is and what he looks like. Again he asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of those you have gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Now, earlier I had said that Peter said that he would die for Jesus. He just assumed eventually Jesus, they'd get backed up, they would get in a corner, and he'd have to fight. He wouldn't just give up. Surely he wouldn't just give up. So they would die together, kind of in a blaze of glory. So he pulled a sword out of wherever, his sleeve and inside his cloak. Now, mind you again, Peter was a fisherman. Peter wasn't a swordsman. So when he went to cut the guy, he wasn't going for nipped his ear. He was going to cut his head off. He was ready to fight. He was going to defend Jesus. They were going to fight their way out or die trying. You don't just give up. You don't just sacrifice. This is Peter. Now, Peter's going to eventually deny Jesus. And again, as the story goes on, we'll find out why. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple, which was John, were following Jesus to see the outcome, or maybe looking for a plan B. Again, this is Peter. He's following along, as one of the other Gospels says, to see the outcome. He hung back just enough to where he could watch, or maybe if Jesus decided to fight, or just decided to get his way out, or whatever happened, he would be there. Again, Peter stating, "I would die with you." Because of this, John was known to the high priest. He went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. "You aren't one of the man's disciples too, are you?" she asked Peter. He replied, "I am not." It was cold, and the servant and the officials stood around the fire they had made to keep him warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there, warming himself. So they asked him, "You aren't one of the disciples too, are you?" He denied it, saying, "I am not." One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. "Didn't I see you with him in the garden?" Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment a rooster began to crow. Now here, several things are going on. So Peter's, yes, he's there trying to stay warm. He's also trying to stay close enough. So this individual, this little girl, these other little girls, these other people, they mean nothing to him. And we kind of do the same thing. When we're in a group and people are bashing God or talking about Jesus, we kind of just sit there and deny it and take it and not really reply when we should be standing up, when we know the truth. So Peter's trying to just stay in there. These people couldn't hurt him, so it didn't matter if he lied to them, denied them. To him, he didn't know he was doing it. He didn't know he was denying them. Not until one of the Gospels says he made eye contact with Jesus. And then he realized it, and then that's when he ran out and laid curses on himself. So the rooster crowing early is another sign that this was going on in the wee hours of the morning. So that's a sign from Jesus there that this was going on when everyone was still asleep. and the shadow of dark. So yes, Peter denied Jesus, but was forgiven during the resurrection, if you'll recall at the end. So I think this part is, in my opinion, Peter, yes, did deny him, but Jesus knew in his heart it was just as we deny, not that you don't exist. There's just times that it's awkward, but we know where our hearts are. But I wouldn't push our luck a whole lot. John 18:25-40. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremony uncleanness, they did not enter the palace. And this was because Jews could not enter the home of Gentiles, or the Romans, because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them. This is important. Pilate had to come out to them where they were. You understand? So the group was already there waiting. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law."
But we have no right to execute anyone. They objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?"
"But we don't have the right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people, chief priests, handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of the truth listens to me." "What is the truth?" retorted Pilate. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But they insisted, "He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teachings. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here." Again, a lie. Stirred up trouble for them, not for the average Jew. On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at this time. This is the same Herod. On his birthday, the daughter of Herodas danced for the guests and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted and had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it out to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went in and told Jesus. Throughout time, kings and queens will cut the heads off of Christian leaders when all they were trying to do is have their people believe in God and trust and love their brother and sister. But this was bad business for kings and queens and rulers, politicians, judges, lawgivers, and authorities. If people follow the law, follow the rule, love and trust one another, don't steal, don't envy, all these laws and rules that Jesus Christ has given us, that God has given us, basically it's two. Love God with all your zeal and all your heart, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. You wouldn't steal from yourself. You wouldn't lust for yourself. So if we did those, there'd be less crime. There'd be less need for these people. Us behaving toward one another is bad business for them. That's what they don't want. Their grip is loosening. Their grip is loosening. People are waking up that they are just making us fight with one another. The border's wide open so they can have illegal voting, so they can keep their reign. It's the same people that we're fighting today. These are the same people that killed Jesus Christ. And I am no way comparing President 45 to Jesus Christ. I'll not judge him, as I'll only be judged by Jesus Christ. But I am comparing, not judging, but comparing the two people, the two groups from then and now. They would rather the nation die as for them to lose their position and lose their rank in high society. These are the same people Jesus dealt with. As he was clearing out the temple, he didn't have anyone else there. They were there. All that meant nothing. When he was clearing out the temple, he wasn't putting a burden on the people to where they hated him. Secretly, they were cheering him on because they knew who these people were, and they knew the oppression that they were putting on them, the burden that they were putting on them. When Jesus went in here, no, he didn't go to the Sanhedrin. He didn't go into the Roman courts. They didn't notice that he was riding on a donkey and a colt, not a white horse like he will be in Revelation at the end of times. He came in peace, but he did clear out the temple. He did deal with believers who were lying, cheating, stealing from other believers, people who knew better. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he had hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. When Herod saw Jesus, he had wanted to see him for a long time. He had heard about him performing signs and miracles. But every time Herod asked him a question, Jesus gave him no answer because he knew he was the one that killed his cousin, John the Baptist. So again, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, which are the Pharisees, are there vehemently accusing him. But again, even Herod lets him off. He's like, there's nothing I can do. There's not two people. There's no one can get their story straight. So even Herod had to let him go again. Because regardless of them jumping up and down and tearing their clothes, which again is a sin in the Old Testament law, is a priest tearing his garment, whether he's mad or not. Again, these guys are not following their own laws, their own rules. But again, they're vehemently just saying he's doing it. And again, Herod lets him go, sends him back to Pilate. And now they're friends. With this, Pontius Pilate went out again to Jesus, gathered there, and said, I find no basis for a charge against him, but it is your custom for me to release you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews? They shouted back, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. If you will. So now let's learn about a backstory on Barabbas. So here we have in Acts 13, they traveled through the whole island until they came to Paphos. There they met a Jewish sorcerer and a false prophet named Bar Jesus. In Mark, then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. So with these two texts, we learn that other people were named Jesus in this time. Also, we learned that, now we learn that Bar means son of. And here's some examples. So the meaning Bar means son of, direct descendant of the Father. The name Bar Jesus means son of Joshua, or son of the Savior. Jesus is Greek form of Joshua, which means the Lord saves. In the New Testament, Bar is frequently employed as a prefix to names of persons. Compare son of Abbas, son of Jesus, son of Jonah, son of Nabos, son of Sabas, son of Tholomew, son of Timaeus. Here in Mark 14:36, it reads, Abba, which means Father. Jesus said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Not yet that I will, but what you will. Again, Abba, Father. So now during my other only earthly word I can use, transformation, during these searches for books, I'd come across Bibles. Large amounts of old Bibles people were no longer using. Family members had passed them down, but the younger generation didn't want them. So they would sell them, or most would give them to me, but I did have to buy quite a few. Well, some were very old transcripts, and I came across a transcript that was very interesting. So when I'm reading this section of about Palm Sunday through the crucifixion and the resurrection, the person who was standing up there with Pontius Pilate, his name was Jesus Barabbas.
So I started investigating, and I come to find out, and some of the old transcripts actually had Jesus Barabbas. So over time, as they started printing out the Bible, man said Jesus, only one man is worthy of that name. So they took it out. Well, that changes the story. It changes the point. And it also changes not who the Jews, the average Jews was choosing, who was the politician choosing, an innocent man or Caesar? Who were the high priests, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the money changers? Who were they choosing? An innocent man or a murderer? Let's find out now more about Jesus Barabbas. So first several manuscripts name the terrorist, Jesus Barabbas, and quote Pilate as asking, whom do you want me to release for you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah? Barabbas was a Jewish terrorist in the custody of Roman police in Jerusalem at the time Jesus was arrested and tried for sedition. He was more than a terrorist. Josephus uses the term as a synonym for the Sicarii, a group of Jewish radicals who would use a sikha, Latin, a long dagger, to assassinate both Roman and Jewish leaders whom they considered to be apostate. They often did this during the festivals when Jerusalem was filled with worshipers. They would mingle in the crowds, strike their victims, and then blend in and disappear. He called them murderers. This is from the book Josephus, who was a historian during the time after Jesus' resurrection through the first AD 100. So now we're understanding more about this story. Jesus Barabbas. So now we know Bar means son of, Abba means father. So we know son and father, son of father. Jesus, which is Joshua,
which is also YESHUA. YESHUA. So now, the second and deeper irony of reading Jesus Barabbas appears when we note that Barabbas, or Bar-Abbas, is the Hellenized form of the Aramaic name Bar-Abba, which means son of the Father. And the name Jesus, Greek Yeshua, is the Hellenized form of the Hebrew name Yeshua. So then basically Pilate was in sense asking the Jerusalem crowd, which one do you want me to release to you? Joshua, son of the Father, or Yeshua, son of the Father, which his followers called Messiah. Pilate gave up on Jesus for another Jesus, one son of the Father in place of another son, in place of another. He exchanged an assassin for an innocent man who died in his place. The decision surely has the fingerprint of God. Now, this is where, earlier in our story, I had spoken that this is where the plan was changed. Two things happened. One, Judas showed up for the high priest, right in their hands. Two, they had arrested Jesus Barabbas, one of these terrorists, a murderer. Everyone was looking out for these groups. They would be up in the hills, and during these festivals, which during this festival they were arrested just the day before. So now then they knew they could have two Jesuses up there. This is God, but they also knew there could be some confusion with whomever they could get there. This is why Pontius Pilate is so confused as we continue through the story. You know who this one man is. How can you guys want him gone? How can you guys want him released? You know who he is. So as the story goes, Pontius Pilate knew that this guy was bad, but he was stuck between a high priest and a riot and Caesar, and him losing his position. So again, Pilate was a spineless politician that tried to appease everyone. He also knew that Barabbas was an evil man. Pilate knew, being a Roman governor, that this group had killed many Roman leaders. So they had warrants out for them. Everyone was looking for them. They had arrested them. So then Pilate took Jesus, had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you, to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns, purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." Now, when Jesus said, "Here is the man," I think he was saying, are you guys confused because their names are the same? This is what he looks like. These are not the same two guys. What's going on? How can you people want this one over the other one? You've all been complaining about arresting these groups because they've been killing your people as well. But the high priests, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the money changers, and even some Roman officials needed Jesus to be dead. So things went on back to normal. Just as things are going on today, the plot thickens. Soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Now let me say this. The crowd of Jews was not the crowd of all Jews who was there for the Passover. This was only a small group. This was only a small group who was loud and persistent, screaming, "Crucify him," because that is all they knew and was told to yell. The high priest had the ability to keep out whom he wanted to keep out, and not all were allowed in that area of the judge's seat. The temple guards, the temple associates, other high priests throughout the regions, and the largest crowd was the other zealots, friends and family of Bar-Abbas, other known as Jesus Bar-Abbas. Now you remember from the beginning, Pontius had to come out to them, came out to an area they were. They had the temple guards. They had the temple associates. And they knew dialect. They knew north from south. They knew how everyone sounded. But also, you had the temple guards able to keep out who they wanted to keep out. And again, this is early in the morning. Not as many people are up. It's still breakfast for some. They're not up out yet. They're still up out in the tents, up out in the hills, cooking, eating breakfast while this is going on. We're coming up to wee hours in the morning. It's daylight. It's getting closer to noon now, and people are coming in, but they just have to keep people away because not everybody is allowed into this area. And again, not everyone's coming into this area because they didn't want to be unclean. They wanted to eat the Passover. They would have to have left for 7 days or 10 days, I forgot. But they would have to have left the Passover, not be able to eat. So they weren't going anywhere near any Jews or Roman area. So this was a setup, like I'd said earlier. Only a few hundred dictated Jesus' death. Not all the Jews. The high priests want us to believe that. The devil himself wants us to believe that. Why? Because the Jews have been crucified, have been the scapegoat ever since. So now let's let these people free. Let's let them go. They didn't one day love Jesus and then the next day hate him. That's the story that we're told. They knew what he was doing. They were cleaning out the temple, and that's what they wanted to. They didn't want to go inside to buy their doves and their animals, which also they were selling not pristine animals, doves that were dead. They knew this was wrong, but they were scared of them. It says that over and over, how scared they were of these people. So here again at the final time, Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." Again, Pilate trying to free Jesus Christ. The Jewish leaders again insisted, "We have a law, and according to the law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize that I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of greater sin." So, is that Judas or the high priests? They're supposed to be held to a higher standard. They're supposed to be held to higher of all, just like today. Judges, politicians, they're here for all, not one side or the other, and they're not supposed to judge harshly. Mercy triumphs judgment all day long, not judge with a heavy hand. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." Now when Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which is Aramaic is Gabbatha. And it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him."
Here again, they're wanting him out of here. They're wanting, he's almost like evidence, hurry, put him on that cross, nail him to that tree. Now, Jesus had to die. Hear what I'm saying. God planned for him to die for our sins. Somebody had to do it. Was it a whole nation? Or just a few who were unholy, unrighteous, and watching out for their own best interest, not a nation? Again, as today, comparing the two evil groups and what they're doing to the people today, forcing division, hanging a scapegoat, genocide from one group to another group. These people are pushing that. And for a reason. They're the same of what's going on today. Here's your king, Pilate said to the Jews, but they shouted, take him away, crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priest answered. Please, let's understand how desperate these people are. This is a high priest, chief priest, who knows the Old Testament, who knows what he's supposed to share with his people, who knows you shall have no other king but God. And he's so desperate, he says, we have no king but Caesar. These people hung their own people out to dry for centuries and centuries and centuries to come. And they didn't care. It wasn't all of the Jews. Just like today, a handful of people who are the same zealots on the left and on the right went into that Capitol building, and the average constitutionalist, red, white, and blue, God-fearing, loving American was outside. But now is being the scapegoat for what happened on January 6th. The problem is the same people are protecting their own best interests. Jesus showed us who to beware of in his own actions. I've been telling this story since 2019. That one of those rallies ended up being the last rally was going to be a setup. Not because I'm comparing Jesus Christ and President 45, but because the actions of the people who are protecting their own interests are the same. And they are repeating history. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. Now we'll go back. 2 rebels were crucified with him. So now we know who Jesus Barabbas was. He was the leader of these zealots. So now we know the other 2 men up there. They were not thieves. They weren't stealing anything. They were murderers. They were insurrectionists. And they were there because they were caught with Jesus Barabbas. And they were murderers as well. Jesus took the place of one. Jesus wasn't supposed to be there. When those 3 were caught, the plan had to be ramped up. They were not going to do this during the festival. But again, 2 things happened. Because Judas Iscariot and his temptation by the devil and his 30 pieces of silver and the arresting of Jesus Barabbas, God put those together.
for these people to choose. Again, Pilate had to choose between freedom, an innocent man, and Caesar. And the high priest had to choose between an innocent man and an insurrectionist who've murdered his own people. And we know who they chose. And so here you see highlighted in red, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God. And in the same way it says here, the chief priests and the teachers of the law and the elders mocked him. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. These were not your everyday average Jews. Again, these were the same high priests and Pharisees and Sadducees who's been trying to trick him the whole time and try to catch him in lies. This is the same group. And it says here, in the same way the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. So from noon until 3 in the afternoon darkness came all over the land. And about 3 in the afternoon Jesus cried out loud, my God, why have you forsaken me? So now we're at the time where Jesus is on the cross. So now all his followers knows that he's there. They're all hanging up there. Now they're like, just come down. So there may have been doubters at that point, but that's not the people who crucified him. Because at this point it didn't matter who he was. He was already up there and he was crucified, being crucified. So they heard him calling for Elijah. And so when he died, the temple curtain tore apart. The earth cracked. And as Matthew, it says, bodies of the dead came out of the tomb and walked among the people. Now, I don't hear many preachers ever talk about this. And again, you have to come back to where killing off witnesses is what these people did. So if anyone, like Lazarus, who ended up disappearing from the story, these people were shut up, just like today. Just like saying, if you believe in this, or you have a theory of this, or a theory of that, or you're crazy. And then the own people call you crazy. And then you're thinking outside of the norm, so you must be crazy. So to think back then that resurrection, or people could come back from the dead, you were crazy. That didn't happen. You were outside the norm, just like now. If you have a theory that doesn't match any of their theories. This is where we are, and this is where they were. There's no difference. We're walking in footstep with it as we speak. So here Jesus said it is finished. And what was finished? He had died for our sins. He had taken on the curse. With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. This is in Matthew 12:38-40. This was before Jesus was arrested during his ministry. Some of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law said to him, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. He answered, A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So now then that tells us that it's 3 days and 3 nights in the earth, as Jonah was. Now if you read the book of Jonah, he was dead. His head sunk to the seaweed. Jonah said that he was at the valley of the sea, at the pit. When you sink that far, you're dead. He may have been in the belly of the fish, but he was dead. But his spirit, if you read the story, is in Sheol. He's arrested. He's imprisoned with the unrighteous, not the righteous. Now, as we read in this story, it was preparation day, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath, as we learn in John 19:31. It's a high day in some translations. So what does that mean? Well, the Passover is a Sabbath that is on the 15th of that month. And so, as in some of our Christmases, some of our other holidays, it may end up in the middle of the week. This wasn't a Saturday weekly Sabbath. This was a Passover Sabbath. The whole story says that over and over. They were there for the Passover. The story says that over and over. They were there for the Passover. So it wasn't on a Saturday.
He didn't die on a Friday.
This is a Wednesday.
The Passover was on a Thursday. And you have to understand the Jewish 24-hour cycle is from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. So at 6:01 p.m., that's their next day at night. And then they went to day. They went from night to day. So we need a 6 to get the number for 3 days and 3 nights. It cannot be done on a Friday. Even if you try to use half a Hebrew calendar for a day and half a Greek calendar for a day.
It can't be done. But what can be done, if you understand that this Sabbath was a high Sabbath, a midweek Sabbath, because it was the Passover. And it was a Jewish holiday to where on the preparation day, no crucified bodies could be still up there on the Sabbath. So at 6:01, those bodies had to be off there. So it goes from a Thursday night to a Thursday, a Friday night to a Friday, a Saturday night to a Saturday. That's 6. And then resurrection, first day of the week, is 6:01 p.m., if you will. Our Saturday night, their Sunday morning. So when it's first of the day of the week to them, as we'll read in one of the scriptures, it's still dark. So we need to understand this more than we need to understand anything. So Jesus was crucified on a Wednesday because of the Hebrew day, 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. is a day, night, then day. He did not die on a Friday. And I'd like to add, 1 Peter 3:18-21 tells us where Jesus was. His body's still in the tomb. His spirit is gone. And as it says here in 1 Peter 3:18-21, for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits. This is not heaven and this is not hell. This is imprisoned spirits of the righteous, of the unrighteous. To those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience toward God. So there not only another reason to be baptized, but it also telling us there is in Sheol a righteous and an unrighteous place. And the imprisoned spirits are in the unrighteous place. Again, no heaven and no hell when you die. There's no judgment has been placed on you at this point. So because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. See, Jesus didn't die of a crucifixion. He died by our loving, caring God, his Father, took him. Crucifixions last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, depending on the health of the individual. So since they couldn't have people on the Sabbath hanging up on the crosses, they go and break their legs. So after breaking a man who's being nailed to a cross, his legs can no longer hold him up. So as he hangs there, the weight of his body will crush his lungs where they can't expand or breathe. So breathing becomes later, and then eventually he dies quicker, within 2 to 3 hours. But Jesus was already gone without breaking his legs. Again, bringing another prophecy true that his legs would not be broken, or no bone would be broken. So as I said earlier on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So here we're at the end of our story. It's the first day of the week, our Saturday night, their Sunday morning, a Jewish 24-hour cycle. The tomb is empty, and Jesus is gone. So Jesus was resurrected. He had went and preached to the people, the souls who died before Noah's flood. All the stories connect. What does this story tell us? That over the centuries, that the Jews were the scapegoat for killing Jesus Christ, the Messiah. All the Jews did not do it. Let's stop preaching it. It was these greedy, organized, state religion, law, judge, politician, police officers, Roman officers who couldn't lose their authority. They couldn't lose their place in this nation. It's what we're going through today. Just like the prophets of old warned the high priests, the Pharisees, that if you don't stop changing your ways, God will show his wrath on you. Judgment. Let's pray for our nation. Let's pray that we can come together as one. Because not only have the Jews been the scapegoat, the future scapegoat is a Christian believer. And then even more than that, the Caucasian Christian believer. All because of lies that are being told now. No genocide for anyone. We shouldn't want to match evil for evil over things in the past. History repeating itself. It will happen. This nation will fall. It will crumble. So let's free the Jews. Let's stop preaching that they were so fickle. Because just as you're the scapegoat today, they were the scapegoat then. May God have mercy on all of our souls, for we do not know what we do. In Jesus Christ's name, God our Father, amen.